right, I'll just get started with a quick introduction as folks trickle in. We can communicate on the chat, but happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you for attending our session about how to create impactful and sustainable equitable processes in your organization. My name is Kristina Giordano, and I'm the Community and Partnerships Manager here at All Voices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. For folks who aren't familiar with All Voices, we are an employee feedback management platform that enables employees to anonymously and, of course, safely report things like harassment, bias, and culture issues directly to company leadership. And we collect that anonymized data and share it with company leaders so they can take action. With All Voices, companies can have real-time access to this information and really help identify these issues before they become systemic problems and really improve company culture and create that psychological safety. To set the stage for our conversation today, we know that the workplace is constantly changing, whether you're remote first, in person, or a hybrid of both. A lot of companies are updating their practices to meet employees where they are, be more equitable, and be more inclusive. According to one built-in study, by 2044, groups formerly seen as minorities in the workplace will reach majority status, and by 2025, millennials are predicted to make up 75% of the workforce. And it is proven that more diverse companies enjoy 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee. So with that, I will stop talking and I'll pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. If you can share your name, pronouns, and of course, your role at your company, that would be great. We'll kick it off to Jen, Thomas, and Kristy first.
I can kick us off. So hi, everyone. Honored to be here with you all and having this conversation. My name is Jen. My pronouns are she, her. I am calling in from Bay Miwok land, colonially known as Concord, California. I'm in the Bay Area. And the title that I hold is Global Talent Director. I'm also our head of diversity, equity, and inclusion and within our talent organization at IDEO. And with that, Thomas, can I pass it to you?
Yeah, awesome. I'm Thomas Igeme. I use pronouns he, him. I'm head of talent at Turn River Capital. Turn River Capital is a small cap private equity firm, just under $1 billion in assets under management. And in my role, I'm portfolio facing. So I support the people teams and executive teams and the boards in our portfolio companies around all things talent. And I'll hand it over to Kristy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Thomas. My name is Kristy Singletary. My pronouns are she and her. I am a senior manager here at Yahoo. I work on the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging team. I lead a lot of our education and awareness programs here. And so since we're doing popcorn, I will pass it over to Crina.
Thank you, Kristy. My name is Crina Pupaza. I am Chief People Officer at Nymbus. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Nymbus is a high growth company specializing in digital solutions for banks, credit unions, and my role is to oversee all aspects related to our people. And I will pass it on to Kristen.
Thanks, Krina. Grateful to be here with you all. My name is Kristen. My pronouns are she and her. I'm calling in from Victoria, but also known as the lands of the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Wasanich nations over here in Canada. I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Tidal Equality, and we're a strategy firm working to empower organizations and individuals to make equitable change in radically new ways. Very excited to be here to meet you all. So thank you. Kristina, back to you.
Awesome. So we have a lot of folks on this panel with a variety of experiences. And before we dig into kind of specific questions about how we can kind of make these changes and make processes more equitable, words matter. I want to make sure that it's in the title. Equity is defined. How do we define equity and what does it look like in practice? Jen, I'll pass it over to you first.
Sure. I think, yeah. I really love that you named that, like, defining words are important, because I think especially now in the industry, diversity, equity, and inclusion have become buzzwords and are starting to lose kind of the meaning and also the impact of what we're trying to have. So in terms of how we at IDEO are thinking about equity, it is a lens and an approach to ensure that all folks have the same, or at least access to, opportunities to be successful and really to thrive. And in order to do that, it is eliminating those barriers to success by also acknowledging kind of historical oppression, present day oppression that needs and means that we all have unique needs in that. So by doing that and by striving for equity, we acknowledge all of those things by eliminating those barriers. It's also important to note that power and privilege plays a whole and a really important part in equity work. And oftentimes those are the things that we like to forget, and it operates on multiple levels. So operates at the individual level, the interpersonal level. It also operates at an institutional level, with that, whether that's in an organization. Oftentimes that's the places that we're working. That's kind of the level I'm at working at. And then we also have to have conversations about that next level, which is like in society, what that means in a systemic way. So kind of thinking about all those levels and all those barriers are the ways in which, at least at IDEO, we're starting to think about, like, what are the interventions around equity that we need to take.
I think that's definitely important context. There's past, present, individual, on a company level, and making sure that as you have this ownership mentality, what is your place to really make change and really create systems that are more equitable. You can always start where you are. One of the things that we talked about in our kind of previous discussion is for hypergrowth companies, there's a huge opportunity to scale processes, and it could be difficult. The way you've done things when you were 5 people is very different than 100 people, and you need to make sure that your workplace is ready for the variety of folks who are going to come into your organization. Can you share kind of an example of how you're scaling or thinking about equitable processes in your role? This could be kind of anything from talent, performance reviews, benefits, anything like that. Krina, I'll pass to you first.
Thank you, Kristina. And one thing before I go into my example, I want to highlight the opportunity that we all have, and particularly with high growth companies, right? So much dynamism, everything is changing. The companies are evolving. It's almost asking for more, better, let's do it again, let's try it. The same for any organization. I don't think any of us would be in the roles that we are and in the position that we are if we didn't believe that change was possible. So very important not to use the past or the situations that we are coming into to say, it's too hard, can be done, how am I going to fix it, right? That's your opportunity. And I think particularly for high growth companies, since we were talking about this, is we have the momentum and we have the opportunity to do it right. Chances are how it was done before, it happened, right? And sometimes when it happens and it's not intentional, it can be good, it can be bad, but oftentimes it's in the middle. For sure, it's not consistent, right? So when we have the opportunity to really look at it from a holistic place and to look at what we are doing, being that it's talent or performance processes or how we are putting benefits in place, I think it's upon us to say, the past is the past. How are we going to do it right now? How are we going to do it right with this moment? I will say chances are whatever you think it's right now, it's going to be obsolete probably in a very short period of time, but go into it and do it nevertheless, right? Because you have the opportunity of doing better than it was done before. And if you keep an open mind, you can come at it again with that scale mindset. You put something in place, you try to do it a little bit better. So for a specific example, for us, much of the work at Nymbus of the past year has been around the employee experience, the benefits, the perks, the culture. So it really permeates into all of those items. How can we make it as inclusive as possible? How can we make it apply to all of our people, realizing that we all come from very different backgrounds and we have different needs and identities and perspectives. And how do we think through the lens of why not? How can we do it better? How can we do it, not even best practices? How can we look boldly at something and come at it through that lens?
I think that's a good question to ask too. Sorry, Thomas, go ahead. I wanted to ask you on this question too.
Yeah, no, I was just going to dive in and respond to that, because I think that lens of what's the opportunity that we have that Krina pointed out, I think is so important here. I think often when we think about equitable processes, because we're talking about fairness and injustice and really groups of people who've been marginalized before, I think there's a tendency to think about it only in terms of those people. However, I think when we're talking about equitable processes, we're just talking about effective or accurate processes. Like if they're not equitable, they're not working, right? No one would be like, well, you know, the speedometer kind of works if the outside temperature is between 70 degrees and 90 degrees and it otherwise doesn't. But so the car is kind of generally working fine. No, the speedometer is broken, right? And I think that's what we're talking about with these processes. And when it comes especially to processes around talent, especially in this talent market, fundamentally what we're saying when we're trying to drive equity is we just want to make sure that we as a company are doing our level best to attract and retain and develop the best talent. And if our processes aren't equitable, that's not what we're doing. So that's the lens that I tend to bring it with it. And I think as I think about scaling it from that lens, there's kind of a key set of typical approaches that I go to around equitable processes, and kind of start with executive sponsorship. I think fundamentally this needs to be something that the executive team as a whole, not just the chief people officer, not just the head of D&I, are truly owning. And I think owning as a performance goal, not just a nice to have moral goal. I think that it's important to define metrics, trying to keep it small, kind of 2 to 3. I think they're lagging and leading indicators as you're thinking through that. And then you're trying to outline a simple process, because in hyper growth, as Krina pointed out, things are always changing. And so what you know inevitably is like, this process is kind of going to be old before it's done. Simplicity, and as well as the people you're working with, are going to be changing and moving in a hyper growth world. And so how do you make it simple, the kind of things that people can get really quickly? How can you think about nudging the right behavior in the process? So we're not just relying on kind of what people know, but the way that they do it to get stuff done. And then lastly, it's a commitment to iterate as you go through that. And so just giving a real example of we did that last year. We realized with our performance reviews that we had a way to go with our equity parity. When we looked at both promotion rates and raise, like kind of the share of raises or bonuses that were given across, there were discrepancies across underrepresented minorities. We brought in an internal consultant to do that, recognized we wanted to do something around that, and performance reviews felt like the immediate process to go after. And so we identified those lagging indicators, but we're like, okay, we're gonna need something leading, because we can't wait 2 years to know whether we've done it. And what we picked on was we were going to kind of try and break bias in the process by giving them opt-in, but one, just literally showing a nudge before anyone did a performance review, reminding them about the general biases that we have at play, and then inviting them to opt in. And then also nudging them to be descriptive and not just rank employees, but actually type out why they were giving the rankings that they were. And so we were able to leverage technology to do that. At that point, Workday was our solutions. We're actually able to build that into the system. And so the process looked like aligning and getting buy-in from the vision and KPIs in the process that we were going after, kind of communicating that vision in our all hands. And I actually didn't have the chief people officer or the head of D&I. We had every single member of the executive team lead it in their specific functions. And then our HR business partners offered opt-in training for managers if they wanted to really dig in there. And one note on this, we really focused on the leading rather than the lagging indicators, because I think very often, if you start kind of going out with like, hey, we're trying to get it to this level, et cetera, there's a lot of in-group, out-group anxiety that can develop in your organization. However, we just got really clear. We're committing to breaking bias. We want every single manager to do this before they do it, to follow these behaviors, to look at their assessments in this way. And we got a lot more kind of engagement that way. And then the last piece was just collecting quick win stories. And what I find is anytime you invest in more equitable processes, what you find is these stories are going to emerge. Stories of people who saw things in a new way, et cetera. And we tried to collect some of those things that brought those to life and then shared those out with the team as well.
I think those are really good examples. And it sounds like what you're talking about is buy-in and really measuring accountability too, and operationalizing these systems that we have to make sure that people are equipped with the tools, resources, and they're reminded with these nudges as well. I think performance reviews are a great way to do that as well. I want to talk a little bit about accountability for a second in terms of if you're not in a diversity, equity, and inclusion role, you're not on the people teams, you're not talking about this more regularly, perhaps, and opening up those silos to a conversation around equity. How do you think about equipping folks across, your organizations to really be equity champions? For this question, I would love to pass it to Kristy first.
Absolutely. So, a lot of things when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it cannot be a sole effort that lives and dies in the HR department. It is something that needs to be spread across the business where everyone can take part and have responsibility to the mission and the vision of the organization. We can drive in of the business need and why it's important, but in order for it to really move forward, everyone has to have a piece of the responsibility. A lot of times organizations would often look to have training events where they will touch on unconscious bias training just so everyone can have a check of understanding what it is, which is always important. It's always important to have that awareness. But really, inclusion is a practice, and this is something that has to continue on. So in order for that, individuals need to be part of that as well. So really empowering and creating change agents within different organizations helps put a responsibility, as well as being able to have a push down approach where you can share your D&I strategy across the organization, and these different champions can actually help tailor their solution and what is particular to that org where you may not have had that much of a reach. Typically D&I areas are on the smaller size. So when you have more hands who are able to really push and move the needle forward, it's an advantage to all. And then it also helps equip the employees to really understand what we are trying to drive in this. What is the mission? What is the purpose of the work that we're doing? And once they're able to have their hands involved and really truly dive in and understand what's going on, it just helps really evangelize the effort more.
Speaking of these initiatives not dying in kind of people and DEI teams roles, Krina and Jen, I want to ask, when you are not in the room, how do you really equip the folks across the organization to really start thinking about these? And really, I guess we're talking about is behavioral change as well, and really making sure they're understanding like how they can make a difference as well. Jen, I'll pass to you first.
Yeah, to build off of Kristy, really appreciated you naming how like purpose and mission is important. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion can really stay at this very intellectual conversation, and people like to stay there. I think most oftentimes in that, you'll have conversation with folks and people will be like, yes, like I'm with you. I want to strive towards those things, and we'll stay at this very high level, intellectual level, and have that conversation. And I think when we're thinking about empowering folks to not just take responsibility, but how do we build in accountability into our systems and our processes, kind of what you're talking about, Thomas, it is about kind of creating the conditions for folks to also understand who they are and how that contributes to their understanding and the relationship with DEI, to then understand how can I take action around that. And I think there's different ways that you can do that in an organization, whether that's creating caucuses, whether that is creating trainings, but creating the conditions again for different levels. To Thomas, your point, also creating that psychological safety for all groups. So maybe that is creating a space for C-level suite folks to have an honest conversation about where are you at with this topic. Because until you can have an individual conversation, and a vulnerable one at that, oftentimes with peers, then it's hard for folks to take that responsibility or that accountability. And we can, in the seat that I sit in, we can integrate the accountabilities and say, as a people manager, you need to be able to think about inclusive leadership. You're accountable to that. But until folks understand and can connect that kind of that head piece to that heart piece, it's really hard for folks to actually move and shake and be responsible for that. So how do we create the conditions for folks to step into the self-awareness? For them to do that, we need to create psychological safety for all groups to be able to do that. And I think that's us as leaders or wherever we sit in an organization to think about, what role do I have in creating that? So in my role as a global talent director of DEI, it is my formal role to create spaces of safety for whether that's C-level suite folks or our folks of color, and knowing that the ultimate goal for equity is that we are serving our most marginalized folks. And for the least amount of harm to be done to our communities in that way, we need that buy-in. We need our white allies. We need our senior level leaders to enter into the conversation authentically. And for them to do that, we need them to be vulnerable and to have the psychological safety to do so. I think oftentimes people feel guilty. They feel like they have to show up, and then it becomes performative and it's not authentic. So I think that's a really important piece about this, is that in order for us to make sure there's the least amount of harm being done to our most marginalized folks in an organization, we need our senior level folks and we need that middle level management to have a conversation with themselves and their peers around, this is where I'm really at, to then be able to understand, okay, what are the resources that you really need versus the resource that you think that we want you to say that you need, if that makes sense. But those are kind of the things that are coming up as we think about, like, what does it look like to empower equity across the organization?
I love that point, and Kristy's earlier about is everybody's job, right? And it's everybody's job as humans, regardless of where you fall in the organization and what your role is, if it's formally dedicated or not, is everybody's job. I want to reemphasize that. From my perspective, what I would add, it's very important, again, the culture of the organization. Is there trust? Is there a mindful way how the company and people within the company are looking to build it, right? Because we all know trust is being built when you value long-term relationships, when you hold your commitments, when you show up, right? And it takes time. For me in particular, I'm fairly new to Nymbus. I've been here since April. I don't expect people will trust me just because I'm here or the title or my name or anything, right? It takes time. We are also fully remote or remote first company. So that means I proactively seek to build relationships, calls, reaching out, virtual coffees, right? Because what I'm hoping that over time that trust is getting built and people will feel more welcome or more inclined to come and speak up, because we want to create that kind of environment where people feel they can speak up. One, it's safe for them to do so. And two, once they have spoken up, something will be done with that, right? Particularly being remote, chances of you not knowing what's happening in every pocket of the organization are fairly high, right? So you want to make sure that you introduce multiple means how people can talk to you, can speak their truth. We are using our voices in this way, right? And it's part of how we got to partner. But in addition to that, leaders reaching out broad within the organization, people checking in on each other, because this way you build that web of relationship and community, and the chance of the right words getting to the right people who actually can do something with it and care to do something with it just increases.
I think that's really important to recognize this holistic strategy, this long-term strategy of building trust. And when we're talking about accountability, asking yourselves these internal questions, some organizations are at the very beginning of their journey, or they understand they need additional help and resources from subject matter experts, similar to Kristen, you and your team's work. Can you share your kind of perspective on when do you know it's time to bring in a partner to help with these initiatives as well?
That's a good question, and one that actually is a bit funny from our organizational perspective, because what we found for a long time was the kinds of things I'm hearing from the others on the panel, you know, having leadership buy-in, having folks who are actually caring about generating psychological safety in the business. Those things are already representative of an organization that's further down their track of maturity, of recognizing the value of creating an equitable workplace and of taking real tangible steps to start working toward that. But in the meantime, I mean, we've got organizations all over the country, all over the world, where there are so many people sitting across various ranks in the business who are going like, enough already, like I can't actually be part of this broader system that continues to uphold the status quo, and the status quo that continues to be inequitable. And many of those people, unfortunately, are going to be in businesses where the C-suite is never going to sanction real positive change and work. But speaking back to kind of what Kristy was talking about, the individual having an opportunity, and what Crina was saying about how when we're growing businesses, often things just happen, right? Like we're on autopilot. And the systemic inequalities we see and experience around us, they're not just like these enormous monoliths somewhere that are controlled by entities out there in the world. They're actually upheld by everyday people making everyday decisions in the same way they've always been made. And Thomas spoke a little bit to like changing the behavior, and an individual, whether they sit in UX design or in pricing or in, you know, customer care, we all are making decisions every single day. And if we make them, if they happen through us, we're likely making them inequitably. And we can be asking ourselves really interesting questions about, how is this thing that I'm doing, this newsletter I'm writing, or this product I'm designing, whose voices am I bringing to the table? Do I have an opportunity to give voice to others who are not at the table right now? And many folks can actually do that without being given permission, without having massive levers of power at their disposal. And so, you know, my roundabout way of answering your question is actually like, we're really impatient at Tidal Equality. And so we're telling folks, like, don't wait till your business goes ahead and like invests a whole bunch in L&D or invests in generating, you know, real dedicated functions to this. There are tools that you can use as an individual to start making this change, whether you can bring in external folks or not. And so we really encourage folks to do that.
I love that. Also, change happens by everyday decisions as well. Jen, did you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to build a little bit on what Kristen says around, you know, when you bring in a partner. I think as an internal facing role, sometimes I have to think about what's strategic for the organization in our journey. And I have to think about my own positionality, because we are all receiving each other, and we all kind of are thinking about each other in like socialized ways. And I know that I have the competency and the skills, let's say, to design and deliver a training. And there are moments where I'm like, I know that an external consultant or a consultant who holds a different identity than I will hold a different level of safety for a different group. So is that the moment where I bring in a partner? Or I have to think about like, who is the group that I'm dealing with? Because as an organization, we're on like a maturity, you know, journey around DEI, but like there are pockets, Kristen, to what you said, of folks around like, I can show up here and they will receive me. And where are the moments where strategically I have to think about what's best for the organization, who is the best partner to show up with this pocket of folks, where it's not about me, as this is not because I cannot do that, but like this is best for the organization in order for us to move forward. So I need to hire a partner. I'll acknowledge that means I have the privilege of resources and money and so on. But I think sometimes as an internal person, that's the conversation that we have to have with our teams around like, it's not that it's a lack of competency on our end. It's about what's strategic around what's going to help us move forward on our journey towards equity, that we need to hire a partner. So I just kind of wanted to add that in around thinking about, when do you bring in a partner, that sometimes it's not about us and that we're not enough internally, because I think sometimes it's positioned that way, but it's not like, no, it's in service of us being able to reach a goal of equity. And in order to do that, that looks like we have to, we have different ways of how we have approach that.
If you have goals around equity, time, money, and resources are very important to dedicate to it. Thomas, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to plus one on what Jen said. And just with the simple idea that, like, very often external partners, like, let's be real, part of equity, and I think taking an inclusive lens, is recognizing that when you're internally, you are dependent on this job for your livelihood at some level. And there's, of course, where, Kristen talked a ton about our agency. And I think we hold that on one end, and the very real reality that you need to be aware of your situation, what feels safe and appropriate. And sometimes partners can just be incredible folks to come along and kind of say this stuff that lots of people are thinking but don't have the agency to kind of provide a safe, anonymous space to take that in. And very often, in my experience in organizations, hold a mirror up, particularly to the executive team, that can be hard for people who are reporting to them to do so. So just as a plus one on everything Jen said.
I do want to talk about executive leadership too, because that was brought up in a couple of the kind of comments around the necessity for executive leaders outside of kind of people and DEI teams as well to really be bought into this process of equity, no matter if they're in sales, marketing, et cetera, the CEO of the organization. How do you kind of show and talk about the importance of equity and equitable processes to leadership within your organizations? Kristy, I'll pass this to you first.
So to really demonstrate, really as leaders, especially as executive leaders, your employees are looking at you for leadership. They're looking at kind of what to do. What is supposed to be the way that I need to approach this? So really identifying your processes and where there are opportunities for improvement. So a lot of the times, really showcasing, and what we do at our organization is really have a conversation with our executive team and really just showcase, this is your workforce. This is some opportunities that we need to look at, and this is the approaches and the strategic way that we want to accomplish this. And we'll need your lean in and buy-in to help this accomplishment, for us to accomplish this. So really identifying and taking a part of one of the processes. We look at recruiting from racially and gender diverse groups. What is exactly going on within the process? What is your current snapshot? And looking at like what's working well and what needs to improve, and what are some ways that you're actually going to create that change. Really, diversity and inclusion is a lot of change management, so it's really bringing that awareness piece, but then also building in that desire. What is it for me? What is it really my responsibility as a leader to make this change? And that's where the accountability comes in, to really showcase that you are tracking to see if there is any change in after the recommendations and after the objective measures that are put in place to help debunk that bias, and really to identify where are some ways to really create more diversity within different processes. So it's really just holding and showcasing and providing that data and information to executive teams, and showcasing the case study of this is what is not working and this is where we need to improve, and how to identify those opportunities to do so.
If I could jump in too and build on what Kristy said, something that we found some leaders need reframing around is that, as leaders, they feel like they're expected to have the answers and know things and be able to project into the future and all these things. And so especially if they're leaders who come from traditionally, advantaged groups, they're like, I don't know, like, how can I really show up in this space? And reframing their thinking so that they realize, really what people are looking for is for you to model what it looks like to be persistently curious about how is inequity showing up here today, and how is it showing up here today, and let's be curious about how we can solve it, because it's not like I get something perfect and then share it to the world as a shining golden example. It's like, no, like we're really only going to solve these problems when we're persistent and curious and vigilant, and modeling that is, someone else on the panel used the word journey. It is a journey, and it is not a thing that someone gets a certificate and they've done the deal and it's over. And I think that's sometimes a bit of a difficult shift for leaders to make, but also we found really like liberating, because they realize all of a sudden that this is a learning journey. I'm not expected anymore to just like have it sussed, and I can model that journey of learning. So that's something just to add.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's said. I probably take even more of a cynical and shrewd approach to this than maybe I even should. But kind of in addition to that, I do believe there are moments. You know, I certainly where we were at last year with Black Lives Matter and just the commitment of a ton of executives in a new age to racial equity was a moment in time. And I think being aware of those moments where our executive feeling pain and pressure and pouncing on that is really important. I'm a big believer in getting quick commitments that are going to have lasting impact. So like commitment to funding for teams like early, right? Commitment to certain metrics over like a 3-year period made to the board and made externally. Things that like once they're made are going to be really hard to go back from, because inevitably the next quarter is going to change. There's going to be new stuff going on, and it's just going to be hard. Maybe that's the cynic in me. It's going to be hard to keep people's attention, so grab it while it's hot. I think the other piece around that is thinking through kind of what your goals are around this, and generally the answer is growth, but it's a two-pronged approach. Are we really trying to kind of make some changes to process? Oftentimes, you don't even need people to be bought into equity and inclusion at the highest level. Like I said, you can take a very efficacy lens for a lot of the things that that drive more equitable processes. More equitable processes are more effective processes, and you can go there. But let's be real, that is not going to address some of the systemic issues in your organization. And in order to do that, that needs the ability to have some real conversations about, like Jen called out, Kristy did, Kristen, Crina, the history of marginalization, et cetera. What I found to be most effective driving that is to really surface the stories of real employees in their own words. It's amazing how I've seen executive teams who've been looking at the same data around what we're doing on hiring for 5 years and unable to move, hear 3 stories from new hires about their experience in the organization, and it suddenly clicks. I think we often think executives we're data-driven people, we're going in there, but we're also human. And because of that heart connection that you opened us with, Jen, ultimately, I think stories of real people's experiences often opens that up. And I think the closer you can get to that being the pyramid, I've seen that, and this is probably getting too tactical, but bring in a consultant, have them anonymously record employees in their own voice, kind of switch off the slides and just have the team listen for 5 minutes to what the experience of being marginalized in an organization is. I'm gonna guess you'll be having a very different conversation after that than you were before 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, I appreciate you naming that, Thomas. I think storytelling is such a key piece of how this work kind of moves through an organization and where impact is felt. And I wanted to build off of something, Kristen, that you said around for leadership, this mindset shift from having to know all the answers. One, that I think a lot of folks have one kind of archetype of leadership, and that is, I need to know the answers. I need to be able to, show up in a way where it looks like I'm knowledgeable about something. And I think there is a shift that needs to happen and around what we believe to be leadership. And I think when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're asking folks to lead with authenticity and vulnerability, and we have been socialized not to do that. We've been socialized to say that's not leadership. So I think having that mindset shift, but also giving folks the opportunity to see, like, you know, power and privilege is not something that we have created. It's something that we have just inherited. So it's not a reflection of you being a bad leader, but like, how do we shift that? What do you need to shift that? And, you know, as we create, again, what I named around like that psychological safety and that container for senior leaders to do that. And you don't get to take away the power that you hold as you're on this journey. You still need to understand what your relationship to the power that you hold, and that you still make decisions and you're still accountable. So how do we create a system where you can lean in, you can acknowledge where you're at, and where you sit in the organization, you still have to be accountable to the decisions that are impacting our people. And I think that's where storytelling is really, really important. So folks know that like these, you know, these numbers, this data that we are bringing to you are not just numbers on a paper. These are people, these are humans, these are their livelihoods. We're not just talking about numbers in terms of salaries. We're talking about how people are putting food on their tables and roofs over their heads. So, your accountability, you don't get to take that away, but we can create the conditions for you to stand in confidence behind that accountability.
I love this topic, and it sounds like we all had so much to contribute on it. We talked a little bit earlier about how everyone plays a role, and I stand by that, I believe, but nobody plays a larger role than the executive team. And people are looking at the leadership team and they want to see them doing the right thing. They want to see them caring. They want to see them being vulnerable, right? And then people start mirroring, because no matter how courageous and brave and outspoken somebody is going to be, maybe in a pocket of the organization, if it's not being picked up, amplified, and resonates with the champions of the culture and those that are in the decision-making roles, it goes nowhere, and that person is either going to leave or forever shut up and never say another thing, right? And that's not something that I think any of us wants. So loved this topic, and I truly believe it starts, I don't know if it starts, but definitely the commitment of the executive team and the true care at that level is key to any step forward and any success. And that shows up in a variety of ways, from resources, from speaking about it, from calling it out and holding accountable when it's not happening, right? From really continuing to find ways to learn to do better. That's where all of those things coming together, it's really going to move the dial.
Speaking of storytelling, we do have a question from an audience member. It's an anonymous question. If, as a reminder for the audience, if you do have a question, feel free to send it over to us. But this one is specific, and anyone can answer this question. But this person said, I've heard one of my white male colleagues, a manager on a different team, say that they are being marginalized in the talent market right now. If they applied to another job, they wouldn't be an ideal candidate. How do I have a conversation with him about this? I know he's on a different part of his journey, as someone was talking about on the panel.
If I can pipe up, this, you know, we work in large organizations across North America, and we have like an open door policy. And many times, in fact, when we're doing equity work, we will have folks come to us with that very same thing. You know, we're talking about marginalized groups in these businesses and creating equitable environments. And, you know, and I'm thinking of one conversation I had with a gentleman in particular who said that very same thing. He's like, I'm the one who is being discriminated against. And I mean, it would be a different thing if I'm having this conversation with him around a kitchen table, you know, with some coffee or tea or whatever, and we could go more deeply into systems of oppression and so on, and his historical relationship to those things. But we don't always get the opportunity to have the kind of rapport with a person to be able to do that. And what I found effective in the past is, you know, what is at the root of what this person is looking for? They want to know that the processes they engage in are equitable. They want to know that when they're up in an opportunity for advancement or hiring, that's transparent and that is equitable for everyone who applies for that opportunity. That's at the root of what he's describing. And what I can say to folks like that is, you know what, like that desire you have for equity, for transparency, to know that you know, that maybe there's such a thing as meritocracy in this case, that is the same thing that everyone wants, that everyone desires and everyone deserves. And so the conversation that we're having around equity, that's what we're all aiming for here. And so when we are able to provide folks a link to the common cause behind our desire and our work toward equity, they can reframe that so that all of a sudden they don't feel like they're the victim, but that, oh, you know, myself and every other applicant or every other candidate desires this transparency and equity too. Okay, like maybe I can see this in a different light. Again, that's given if you don't have the opportunity to develop rapport in a relationship and help the person potentially see this in a broader context. But I think we sometimes skip the step of generating that common cause that we are all going to benefit together collectively from equality being the rising tide that lifts all boats. And sometimes making that salient and front and center for a person can help them reframe their thinking on the issue.
Lifting
I
all.
just,
Go ahead.
just +1 to what Kristen just said. And it goes back to what I started with, where I think we do a disservice to what we're talking about when many times I think those of us who are advocates for equitable processes are actually doing a disservice to the cause by framing it only in terms of the impact to underrepresented minorities, as if it's an issue for them and we're just trying to help this little group over here. Kristen, I loved your language of the common cause. None of us likes to feel that the systems that we're in are unfair. That sucks for all humans. And it sucks for us as a business, quite frankly. And this is like our attempts to like come together to do that. And it can be hard, especially when you're aware, let's also be real, that oftentimes on one hand, you have an employee who's worried that they're not going to get ahead and the next time they go for a job, and you have another employee who's worried about being shot by the cops when they stop. And you're like, hey, I'm sorry, but we have priorities. And yet I do think that for all of us, progress starts with compassion. And Kristen, I heard so much of the compassion in your answer in justifying that the thinking may be wrong and the framework may be wrong, but the yearning is so human. And being able to extend that gift, even at times when it's really difficult, and many times we don't have the capacity to. That is whenever I've seen progress and change happen, that's where it started from. And so just thank you so much for outlining that for us, Kristen.
Getting to the root of the question and why someone is having this experience, having a two-way conversation, active listening, empathy, really important here. Another question we have, and I'm going to add on to this question too, is do you and your companies focus on veterans in terms of recruitment? And I'm also going to add if you have any advice for companies who are just starting up like a veteran recruitment program or anything like that. This question is from Timothy, and anyone can answer.
I'll take that first because we just went through an exercise trying to think how we can both tap and give back to that community, and where we found the right partnership. Again, Nymbus is a remote first, so for us we have the luxury of hiring anywhere nationally. So we realized that an amazing opportunity for us is really to partner with an organization that it's called Hire Our Heroes Military Spouse Fellowship Program, that really brings forth candidates that are spouses of military personnel. So they often relocate, right? They go from base to base. We do know both spouses and military and veterans are highly educated, right? But oftentimes as they are moving from a place to another, they will lose their jobs. They have to start all over again. So we thought it was a tremendous opportunity to partner. And this is an area that we are looking to do more and bring some folks on board, and hopefully we will work for them and for our organization as well.
I like to add on to that because I'm actually a veteran myself. So a lot of the partnerships, like you mentioned, Krina, Hire Our Heroes, there's a military spouse program, and it's great to really understand how the transferable skills are so applicable. A lot of veterans who are coming out of service sometimes have those difficulties of really trying to understand those certain skill sets that they had over that time transfers amazingly into the civilian corporate life. So it's a really a transition for people to really understand, how can I take all the skills that I've acquired for this years I've dedicated my time to service into an organization. So there's partnerships that you can do, and there's also awareness opportunities as well of providing some different volunteer activities, or really just showcasing and spending time with organizations that you can go through resumes, or really just understand how skills can be transferred over into more of the corporate setting. Really providing the aid, bringing more awareness around veterans, because sometimes they can be a forgotten community, essentially. And, if you're looking at some of the different activations and pillar months throughout the year, there's plenty of times to draw homage and really just dive in and educate yourself about the military. And that can help trigger and really enforce a little bit of opportunities of how you can give back to that community.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristy, and Krina, for sharing kind of how to partner and kind of look at also, I think inclusive job descriptions are really important as well in terms of the experience and skills that you're looking for. And this relates to our next question from the audience before we wrap up as well. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but the question is around, how are you making processes around job opportunities more accessible in a remote world, specifically for folks for varying abilities? And anyone can answer this question.
So I can go, because I think in my current world it is really mixed. So one of the advantages, once again, with our portfolio companies, we're remote friendly across the United States, and so that's really allowed us to hire amazing talent from anywhere, as well as not allow people to have the accommodations that they need at home. It is something that we're wrestling with internally in our company, because we have a very in-office culture. And I don't want to paint the picture that all the answers are covered. I think I've historically worked at larger tech companies where this was really easy, and a small financial investment firm where we're in the office 4 days a week. And so much of the culture is doing that I'm still kind of figuring out what an inclusive environment and hiring is going to look like in that world. And I'd honestly love to hear from the panel or for anyone in the audience if you have any ideas, because it's something I'm working through.
I would say at my organization, we have an accessibility council. So the same way of how you have the diversity councils that really help inform decisions, we've actually been able to leverage accessibility council that can highlight and identify areas of opportunities for us to focus in on. And last year was crazy. The pandemic, we all had to go home and work from home, and we didn't know when we were going back to work, and we're still in the pandemic now. But there was a beauty in this crisis where we were able to really democratize the ability for people to work from anywhere in the world, as long as they had an internet connection. So how can we really lean in on that advantage and really help really formalize that any of these different kind of opportunities can help, really anyone can do these roles. So it's really how the communication of how we can showcase that these organizations these opportunities are able to have anyone who is able to do the role, despite of where they're at in the world. They do not have to have that the ability to go into the office now. They can actually work remote, and really it's an opportunity to partner and being very intentional about that process too, knowing that there may be some additional help to really ensure that someone is set up for success as they are onboarding, caring for them during that process, and really just understanding more. So.
I think that's really helpful in terms of asking and not assuming what people need as well, and being really intentional and setting up, again, a psychologically safe space for someone to come forward and kind of share that information as well, and also feedback for potential employees too. With the last couple of minutes, I would love if we could go around and share just maybe one call to action you have for folks on this call, knowing that people sit in different parts of the organization for folks who are joining, but we'll start with Kristen and then go to Crina, Thomas, Jen, and Kristy, if you remember that order.
I think, and at Tidal Equality, we really believe that the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is in democratizing decision-making. So from wherever you sit today, from whatever decisions are on your plate, whatever lever of power you have, small or big, see how many voices, how many perspectives that you can bring into your decision-making. And even in just that endeavor, you're likely to make it more equitable, you're likely to make it more inclusive. And so shifting that thinking away, like Thomas said, from a regulatory activity to one that is all about process improvement, the improvement of people's experiences, and ultimately equity and greater equality in the world. Let's head in that direction.
My call to action would be demand fairness and equity. Do the right thing when you are in a position of making that decision or influencing a decision. And if you're not, speak up relentlessly and partner so we get in a better place together.
Mine would be aggressive with your targets and compassionate as you with your failures. And that's just this idea of iterating. The more, it was talked about a lot here in terms of psychological safety, which is absolutely right. If we're really going to go on this journey, we have to be willing to fail at it, and sometimes in some really embarrassing ways. If anybody else had figured out how to do it perfectly, we wouldn't be having the conversation that we're having today. And so be really aggressive. Don't kind of shy away as we think about goals, but let's always be willing to fall down and try again.
My call to action would be at an individual personal level. So I would say, like, for every individual to, if you haven't, just understand how you're socialized in this world. Like, read up, look up what the cycle of socialization is, do an identity wheel, and understand who you are and how that impacts how you show up in the world. That will help inform how you continue to move forward in this work.
Great. I love that, Jen. There's actually something very similar I was going to say, is just to really continue to know that we're on a journey. Be, courageous in stepping forward to make change, but also be empathetic with yourself and knowing that you don't have all the answers. And the more that you find out, the more you're going to realize that you don't really know anything. So just know that we are, the more and more you find out, the less you realize you know. But just know that, we are all on this journey together, and there's support, there's resources, there's educational tools that you can always take advantage of. So just know that as long as we are all moving forward, baby steps are better than no steps. So continue on the journey, and also take rest and recharge.
That is a great note to wrap up on. Kristen, Crina, Thomas, Jen, Kristy, thank you so much for being on our webinar today. If folks have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we are all on the internet, on LinkedIn. But thank you so much for our audience for attending. And to reiterate, if you aren't familiar with All Voices or you have any questions about employee feedback management, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Kristina.
Thank you.